The security footage would change everything. But Alexander Thorne didn't know that yet as he sat in his office on the 47th floor, staring at quarterly reports that meant absolutely nothing compared to what was happening 12 miles away at Westridge Academy. Now, let me tell you about the moment that shattered a billionaire's perfectly constructed world. The call came at 2:47 p.m. Alexander's assistant knew better than to interrupt board meetings, but the tremor in her voice cut through his concentration like a blade. "Mr. Thorne, it's about Ethan. There's been an incident at school." His blood turned to ice. Not again. The drive to Westridge Academy should have taken 40 minutes. Alexander made it in 22, his driver navigating traffic like they were escaping a crime scene. Because in a way they were. Every second that ticked past was another second his 8-year-old son faced whatever horror awaited him. Ethan, his brilliant, beautiful boy who couldn't say his own name without stuttering. The son he'd failed to protect from a world that devoured weakness like sharks smelling blood and water. The academy's principal met him at the entrance, her face carefully neutral in that way administrators perfected when delivering bad news to wealthy parents. "Mr. Thorne, thank you for coming so quickly. Ethan is physically fine, but where is he?" "The nurse's office. But first, I think you should know what happened." Alexander's jaw clenched. "Show me my son. Now." The principal's mask cracked just slightly. "Of course. But Mr. Thorne, he wasn't alone when we found him." That stopped him cold. Ethan was always alone. That was the problem, wasn't it? The boy who ate lunch by himself, who spent recess in the library, who came home with silence wrapped around him like armor because speaking meant stuttering, and stuttering meant becoming a target. They walked through corridors that smelled of floor wax and childhood, past colorful bulletin boards celebrating achievements Alexander knew his son would never claim. Not because Ethan wasn't capable. God, the boy was brilliant. But because brilliance didn't matter when you couldn't force the words past your lips without them fragmenting like broken glass. The nurse's office door was ajar. Alexander heard her voice before he saw her. And that's why dinosaurs couldn't really breathe fire, even though it would be super cool if they could. "Right, Ethan? Tell me I'm wrong. I dare you." A small laugh. His son's laugh. A sound Alexander hadn't heard in so long, he'd almost forgotten what joy sounded like in Ethan's voice. He pushed the door open. Ethan sat on the examination table, his uniform shirt torn at the collar, a bruise blooming purple across his cheekbone. But he was smiling. Actually smiling. Beside him stood a girl of about 10, her dark hair escaping from 2 neat braids, her school uniform considerably more battered than Ethan's. Her knuckles were scraped raw, and there was a defiant tilt to her chin that Alexander recognized immediately. Maria's daughter, Lucia Castellano. The maid's child who'd been living in his household for the past 6 months, practically invisible despite occupying the small apartment above the garage. The girl he'd seen maybe twice, both times in passing, both times registering her existence with the same attention he gave to furniture. She was looking at him now with eyes that held no fear of his wealth or power, only a fierce protectiveness that made something twist painfully in his chest. "Dad," Ethan said, and the word only caught once. "Progress. Lucia SS saved me." "Saved you from what?" The principal cleared her throat from behind him. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my office." "No." Lucia's voice was clear and strong. "Ethan should tell it. It's his story." The girl looked at his son with such absolute confidence that Ethan straightened his shoulders, lifted his chin, and began to speak. The words came slowly, some fragmenting, some flowing, but Alexander listened to every single one like his life depended on it. Because maybe it did. The story that emerged was worse than Alexander had imagined. A group of 5th graders had cornered Ethan during recess, mocking the way he spoke, demanding he say certain words they knew would trip him up. They'd formed a circle, trapping him, each taunt building on the last, until Ethan had been on the verge of tears. And then Lucia had appeared. She just walked right into the middle. Ethan said, his eyes shining with something that looked dangerously close to worship. And she told them to stop. They didn't stop, Lucia interjected matter-of-factly. So I told them if they wanted to make fun of someone, they could make fun of me instead. I said lots of stupid stuff on purpose. Made myself the joke. Alexander's throat tightened. But they got him mad. Ethan continued. Started pushing her. That's when she pushed back. She wouldn't move. just stood there until Miss Peterson came. The principal shifted uncomfortably. The other children claimed Lucia started the physical altercation. "They're lying," Lucia said simply. "But I don't care what they say. They're not going to hurt Ethan anymore. I already told them that." The absolute certainty in her voice, this 10-year-old girl speaking like she could command the universe, sent a chill down Alexander's spine. "Lucia has been quite protective of Ethan," the principal said carefully. "This isn't the first time she's intervened on his behalf, though it's the first time it's escalated to this degree." Alexander looked at his son, really looked at him. The bruise would fade, but something else had changed in Ethan's face. A light that hadn't been there this morning. A confidence that seemed impossible given what had just happened. "How long?" Alexander asked quietly. "How long has this been going on?" Ethan and Lucia exchanged a glance that spoke of shared secrets and solidarity forged in battles Alexander knew nothing about. "Since the beginning of the year," Ethan admitted. "But Dad, Lucia's been helping me. She's—" "We should discuss this at home," Alexander interrupted, his mind racing. There were protocols here, procedures. The other children's parents would need to be contacted. His lawyers might need to get involved. But all he could see was this small girl with scraped knuckles who'd done what he should have done, protected his son. "Hey there, amazing people. Asterisk asterisk, I'm so glad you're here with me today. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. And listen, if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do me a huge favor and smash it right now. Trust me, you're going to want to follow this story all the way through. So what do you think happens next? Drop your predictions in the comments below. And if you're already hooked on this story, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single moment of what Alexander discovers about his son and the girl who changed everything. The drive home was silent except for the soft rumble of the engine and Ethan's occasional sniffles from the back seat. Alexander had insisted Lucia ride with them. Her mother was still at the house, finishing the day's work, and he wasn't about to let the girl who defended his son take the bus after what she'd been through. Through the rearview mirror, he watched them. Ethan sat close to Lucia, closer than Alexander had seen his son sit to anyone in years. Their hands weren't touching, but they might as well have been, connected by some invisible thread of understanding that excluded everyone else in the world, including him. The realization settled in his stomach like stones. When had he last sat close to his son? When had Ethan last sought his presence for comfort rather than obligation? Alexander tried to remember and came up empty, the memories blurring together into a montage of missed bedtimes, forgotten school events, and conversations conducted through assistants and nannies. 3 years since Caroline died. 3 years of throwing himself into work because grief was easier to ignore when buried under acquisitions and mergers. 3 years of telling himself Ethan was fine, that children were resilient, that the best thing a father could provide was stability and security. Financial security. The only kind Alexander knew how to give. "Mr. Thorne?" Lucia's voice cut through his thoughts. "Ethan did really good today. Before everything happened, I mean." He read out loud in English class. The whole paragraph. Mrs. Henderson said it was excellent. Alexander's hands tightened on his briefcase. He hadn't known Ethan was reading aloud in class. Hadn't known because he never asked, never checked, never showed up to parent-teacher conferences because his assistant handled those details. "That's wonderful, son," he managed. Ethan's response was barely a whisper. "Lucia's been helping me practice. Every D-day after school. Every day? Every single day this child had been tutoring his son, and Alexander had been completely oblivious, too absorbed in building an empire to notice what was crumbling in his own home. The Thorne mansion rose before them like a monument to everything Alexander had achieved and everything he'd lost in the achieving. Marble columns, manicured gardens, windows that reflected the setting sun like shields of gold. A fortress designed to impress, to intimidate, to isolate. Ethan had grown up in this beautiful prison, and Alexander had been the warden too busy counting bars to notice his son was suffocating. Maria Castellano was waiting at the service entrance, her face tight with worry. The moment she saw Lucia's torn uniform and scraped knuckles, she gasped, rapid Spanish flowing from her lips as she pulled her daughter close. "She's all right, Maria," Alexander said quietly. She was protecting Ethan. Maria's eyes widened. She'd worked for the Thornes for 6 months, maintaining the invisible efficiency that Alexander preferred in his staff. She cleaned, she cooked occasional meals, she existed in the background of his life like wallpaper. He'd never bothered to learn much about her beyond her references and work ethic. He certainly hadn't known her daughter was a warrior. "Mr. Thorne, I'm so sorry if Lucia caused any trouble." She didn't. Alexander looked at Lucia, who was watching him with those disconcertingly direct eyes. "She did something extraordinary. I'd like to speak with both of you in my study, if that's all right." "You too, Ethan." The study was Alexander's domain. All leather and mahogany and first editions he never had time to read. Ethan had been inside maybe 3 times in his entire life, always for serious discussions about report cards or behavior. The boy entered now like he was walking to his execution, his stutter worse with stress. But Lucia walked in like she owned the place. She settled onto the leather sofa without being invited, pulling Ethan down beside her. Maria perched nervously on the edge of a chair, her hands twisted in her lap, clearly expecting termination or worse. Alexander poured himself a scotch, then thought better of it, and set the glass down untouched. He needed clarity for this conversation, not the comfortable numbness alcohol provided. "I want to understand what's been happening," he said finally. "The truth. All of it." Lucia and Ethan exchanged another one of those loaded glances. Then Lucia nodded, and Ethan began to speak. The story that emerged was devastating in its simplicity. The bullying had started the first week of school. Comments about Ethan's stutter, imitations that sent other children into fits of laughter, exclusion from games and groups. Standard cruelty, the kind Alexander remembered from his own childhood, but had somehow convinced himself wouldn't touch his son in a prestigious private academy. Money, he'd learned today, couldn't buy protection from everything. Ethan had tried to hide it. Came home and said school was fine because he didn't want to worry his father, didn't want to be more of a burden than he already felt. And Alexander, relieved not to deal with complications, had believed the lie. But Lucia had seen through it immediately. "I noticed him eating alone," Lucia said matter-of-factly. "First day Mom started working here. Ethan came home and went straight to his room. Didn't even grab a snack. I thought that was weird because I'm always starving after school." "So you followed him?" Alexander guessed. "So I introduced myself." Lucia's chin lifted. "He wasn't rude or anything. He was just sad. Really, really sad. And when he tried to tell me his name and the words got stuck, I told him my abuela stutters too, and she's the smartest person I know." Ethan was looking at Lucia like she'd hung the moon. "We started hanging out after school," Lucia continued. "Just talking at first. Then I noticed he had this book about planets, and I love space, so we'd read together. And I figured out that when he read out loud to me, the stutter wasn't as bad. So we practiced. Every day," Ethan added softly. Lucia made it fun. Like a game. She'd tea time me and celebrate when I got through a whole page. "Because you're brilliant," Lucia said fiercely. "You know more about astrophysics than most adults. Just because words get stuck doesn't mean ideas do." Alexander felt something crack open in his chest. This child, this fierce, fearless child, had seen his son's worth when Alexander had been too blind or too busy to look. She'd given Ethan something more valuable than all the wealth Alexander possessed. She'd given him belief. "Why didn't you tell me?" Alexander asked his son, his voice rough. Ethan's eyes dropped. "You're always working, Dad. I didn't want to bother you with stupid stuff." "Stupid stuff?" Alexander repeated the words like they were foreign. "Ethan, you are never, do you hear me, never a bother." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. Or rather, he'd made it true through 3 years of absence disguised as ambition. Maria's voice was small, almost apologetic. "Mr. Thorne, I should have told you what Lucia was doing. I should have asked permission before she spent time with Ethan. If you want us to leave." "Leave?" Alexander's head snapped up. "Maria, your daughter just did what I should have been doing all along. Why would I want you to leave?" But even as he said it, he saw the calculation in Maria's eyes. She'd worked for wealthy families before. She knew how this worked, the gratitude that could turn to resentment, the way proximity between classes made employers uncomfortable, the unspoken rules about staff children becoming too familiar with the family. She was protecting Lucia, preparing for the inevitable. Alexander stood abruptly, crossing to the window. His reflection stared back at him. a man in a $10,000 suit who couldn't figure out how to help his own son. Beyond the glass, the ground stretched out like a magazine spread, perfect and lifeless. "I need to see it," he said suddenly. "See what, Mr. Thorne?" Maria asked. "Where they've been meeting. Where Lucia's been tutoring Ethan." He turned back to face them. "Show me." Lucia hopped off the sofa without hesitation. "Come on. It's cool. You'll like it." She led them through the house like she owned it, which was jarring because Alexander had never given her permission to explore beyond the service areas. But she navigated confidently, Ethan trailing behind her like a shadow, until they reached the conservatory. Alexander rarely came here. Caroline had loved this room, filled it with orchids and jasmine, spent hours reading among the plants. After she died, he'd locked the door and tried to lock the memories with it. Somehow, it had been opened. Inside, the space had been transformed. The plants were thriving again, clearly tended with care. But more than that, it had become something else entirely. A corner held cushions arranged into a reading nook. Books were stacked everywhere, not the pristine hardcovers from his library, but worn paperbacks with cracked spines and dog-eared pages. A whiteboard leaned against one wall, covered in Ethan's handwriting. Words he was practicing, planetary diagrams, mathematical equations far beyond third-grade level. And photographs, dozens of them, pinned to a corkboard. Ethan smiling. Ethan and Lucia making ridiculous faces. Ethan holding up a book like a trophy. His son looked happy. Actually, genuinely happy. "Mom helped us fix it up," Lucia explained. "The lock was broken anyway, and all these plants were dying, which seemed sad. So we've been taking care of them. And Ethan said his mom used to spend time here, so we thought." She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Alexander couldn't speak. His throat had closed completely. Ethan moved to the reading nook, picked up a worn copy of A Brief History of Time. "This was Mom's," he said softly. "I found it in storage. Lucia's been helping me understand it. She's really good at explaining things." "Because you're really good at understanding things," Lucia countered. "I just talk slower than your brain works." They had their own language, Alexander realized. Their own jokes and rhythms. A friendship built in secret because Alexander had created a home where his son felt the need to hide the one good thing in his life. "How long has the conservatory been open?" he managed. 2 months, Maria admitted. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne. I should have asked, but Lucia said it seemed wrong to let it stay locked when Mrs. Thorne loved it so much. I thought maybe she would have wanted." "She would have?" Alexander interrupted. "Caroline would have wanted exactly this." His wife had been everything he wasn't: warm, present, attuned to Ethan's needs. When she died in that senseless car accident, she'd taken all the light with her, leaving Alexander to raise their son in shadows. And he'd done such a spectacular job of it that a 10-year-old girl had to step in and do what he couldn't. Be there. Alexander's phone buzzed. His assistant. Another crisis that needed his attention, another meeting that couldn't wait. For 3 years, he'd used these interruptions as escape routes, grateful for excuses to avoid the grief embedded in his own home. He silenced the phone. "Mr. Thorne?" Maria ventured. Alexander looked at his son, really looked at him. The bruise on Ethan's cheek was darkening, a visible mark of today's violence. But there were other marks Alexander hadn't noticed before. Shadows under Ethan's eyes from nights spent anxious, a thinness to his frame that spoke of stress eating away at him, a wariness in his posture, like he was always bracing for the next blow. And yet, when Ethan looked at Lucia, all of that fell away. He stood taller, smiled wider, believed in himself, because she believed in him first. "The children who hurt you today," Alexander said quietly. "Tell me their names." Ethan's eyes widened. "Dad, you don't have to." "Their names, Ethan. Brandon McAllister." Lucia supplied when Ethan hesitated. "He's the ringleader. Then there's Justin Chun, Sophie Dawson, and Michael Torres. They've been after Ethan since September." Brandon McAllister. Alexander knew that name. Knew the father, Gregory McAllister, CEO of a competing tech firm. They'd been circling each other for years, professional rivals who maintained a veneer of civility at industry functions. Gregory's son was the one terrorizing Ethan. Something cold and calculating settled over Alexander. The business instinct that had built his empire now focused with laser precision on a new target. He'd spent 3 years avoiding his responsibilities as a father. Time to remember what he was actually capable of when properly motivated. Maria, I'd like you and Lucia to join us for dinner tonight. In the dining room, not the kitchen. He held up a hand when Maria started to protest. Please. I insist. We have things to discuss. Plans to make. Plans? Lucia asked, curiosity bright in her eyes. Alexander smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile that made corporate raiders nervous and board members sweat. Yes, plans. Because if there's one thing I'm very, very good at, it's making sure people who hurt my family regret it. Dad, Ethan's voice was uncertain. Alexander crossed the conservatory and did something he hadn't done in far too long. He pulled his son into his arms, careful of the bruises, and held him close. I'm sorry, he whispered into Ethan's hair. I'm so sorry I haven't been here. But I'm here now. And I promise you, Ethan, no one is going to hurt you again. Over his son's head, he met Lucia's eyes. She was watching him with an expression that was equal parts challenge and hope, like she was deciding whether to trust him. Join the club, kid, Alexander thought. I'm not sure I trust me either. But he was about to find out what kind of father he could be when he actually tried. The stakes just got real. What do you think Alexander's planning? Comment below with your theories, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Dinner that night was the strangest meal Alexander had hosted in 3 years. Maria and Lucia sat at the formal dining table, Maria rigid with discomfort, Lucia fascinated by the crystal chandelier overhead, while Ethan picked at his food and snuck glances at his father like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Alexander couldn't blame him. He'd been an absent ghost for so long that suddenly showing up felt like a haunting in reverse. Tell me about school, Alexander said, directing the question to both children. Not just today, everything. What you're learning, what you like, what you hate. Lucia answered first, naturally. The girl had opinions about everything. Her English teacher assigned boring books. Her math teacher moved too slowly. Her science teacher was amazing, but kept getting interrupted by kids who didn't care about mitosis. And gym class is the worst, she added, spearing a piece of chicken with unnecessary violence. We have to play dodgeball, which is basically just legalized assault. Lucia, Maria warned softly. It's true. They just let kids throw balls at each other as hard as they can. Tell me that's not weird, Mr. Thorne. Despite everything, Alexander felt his lips twitch. It does seem counterintuitive to the school's anti-bullying policies. Right? Lucia pointed her fork at him like she'd found an ally. That's exactly what I told Principal Morrison. She didn't appreciate my feedback. Ethan laughed, actually laughed, and some of the tension bled out of the room. Alexander turned to his son. What about you? Besides reading astrophysics with Lucia, what else do you enjoy? The stutter was worse when Ethan was put on the spot, but he pushed through. I like art class. And history. Mrs. Chun, not Jay Justin's mom. Different Mrs. Chun. She's teaching us about ancient Rome, and it's really cool. He's amazing at art, Lucia interjected. He drew this whole solar system with all the moons labeled correctly. Even the weird ones around Jupiter that nobody cares about. They're not weird, Ethan protested. They're scientifically significant. They're weird and significant. Things can be both. Watching them banter, Alexander felt the weight of his failures pressing down harder. This was what Ethan needed. Not expensive toys or exclusive camps or a trust fund that would set him up for life. Just someone who actually saw him, who engaged with his interests, who made him feel like his words mattered even when they stuttered out imperfectly. After dinner, Alexander retreated to his study and made 3 phone calls. The first was to his head of security. I need surveillance footage from Westridge Academy. Today's recess period. Everything you can get. The second was to his lawyer. Gregory McAllister's son has been bullying Ethan. I want to know everything about that family. Financial status, business dealings, where they're vulnerable. The third was to the headmaster of Westridge Academy, a man who owed his position to a generous donation from the Thorne Foundation 3 years prior. Jonathan, Alexander said pleasantly, we need to discuss your school's bullying problem. By midnight, he had what he needed. The security footage was damning. 12 minutes of Ethan being circled, mocked, and physically intimidated while teachers remained conveniently absent. And then Lucia, tiny and fierce, pushing through the circle and planting herself between the bullies and their target. The girl had taken 3 hard shoves before she'd pushed back. Self-defense, clear as day. Yet the principal's report had framed her as the aggressor. Interesting. Alexander's research on the McAllisters was equally enlightening. Gregory's company was hemorrhaging money, propped up by investments from parents of other Westridge students. A nice little network of wealthy families protecting each other's interests, including, apparently, their children's right to terrorize others without consequence. Alexander smiled in the darkness of his study. He'd built an empire by understanding leverage. Time to teach these people what leverage actually meant. The next morning, Ethan appeared at breakfast looking terrified. "Dad, you don't have to come to school with me. I'll be fine." "I'm sure you will be," Alexander agreed, adjusting his tie. "But I'm coming anyway. We have a meeting with Principal Morrison." "We?" Ethan's eyes widened. "You, me, Lucia, and Maria. We're presenting a united front." Maria nearly dropped the coffee pot she was refilling. "Mr. Thorne, I don't think." "Maria, your daughter was assaulted while protecting my son, then blamed for defending herself. You have every right to be in that meeting. In fact, I insist on it." Lucia appeared in the doorway, already dressed in a fresh uniform. The scrapes on her knuckles were scabbed over, but still visible. "Are we going to get them in trouble?" "Because I'm not a snitch, but I also think Brandon McAllister is a future felon, and someone should probably intervene now before he escalates to actual crimes." "Lucia," Maria gasped. "What?" "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." Alexander studied the girl. She was completely unafraid of him, which was refreshing and slightly unnerving. Most adults approached him with careful deference. This 10-year-old looked at him like he was just another person who needed to get with the program. "We're going to make sure this doesn't happen again," Alexander said carefully. "To Ethan or anyone else." "Good." Lucia grabbed a piece of toast. "Because honestly, Westridge has a serious culture problem. You wouldn't believe the stuff kids get away with just because their parents donate to the library fund." The meeting at Westridge Academy was exactly as Alexander expected. Principal Morrison defensive, the school counselor making excuses, a lawyer from the district hovering nervously in the corner. What they didn't expect was Alexander Thorne arriving with his own lawyer, a USB drive of security footage, and a very detailed understanding of the school's liability exposure. "The way I see it," Alexander said pleasantly, 20 minutes into Morrison's explanations about complex social dynamics and children working through conflicts, "you have two choices. Choice 1. We implement a comprehensive anti-bullying program, provide Ethan with support services, and ensure the children who assaulted him face actual consequences. Choice 2. I pull my son from this school, pull my foundation's funding, and file a lawsuit that will make national news." Morrison's face drained of color. "Mr. Thorne, there's no need for threats." "I'm not threatening. I'm explaining reality." He clicked the remote, and the security footage filled the screen behind him. "This is what happened yesterday. 12 minutes of assault while your staff was mysteriously absent. And then this brave young girl." He gestured to Lucia, who sat up straighter. "Did what your teachers should have done. She protected a child in distress." "The other children claim," Morrison started. "The other children are lying to protect themselves, which is what children do when adults fail to create accountability." Alexander leaned forward. "So which choice will it be, Principal Morrison?" Principal Morrison's office felt smaller with each passing second of silence. Alexander could see her calculating, weighing the cost of compliance against the cost of defiance. Behind her, the district lawyer was frantically typing notes, probably already drafting settlement proposals. "We'll implement the program," Morrison finally said, her voice tight. "And we'll address the situation with the students involved." "Not good enough." Alexander's tone remained pleasant, but steel ran through every word. "I want specifics. A written plan delivered to my office by Friday. And I want weekly progress reports on Ethan's experience at this school. Mr. Thorne, we don't typically provide that level of individual monitoring." "Then start." He stood, signaling the meeting was over. "My assistant will send you the contact information. I expect the first report Monday morning." As they left the building, Lucia whispered to Ethan, "Your dad's kind of scary when he wants to be." "Kind of," Ethan whispered back, but he was smiling. In the car, Maria finally spoke. "Mr. Thorne, thank you for advocating for Lucia. I know she can be headstrong." "She's exactly what Ethan needed," Alexander replied. "What he still needs." He'd been thinking about that all night. The conservatory revelation had shifted something fundamental in his understanding of his household. Lucia hadn't just been tutoring Ethan academically. She'd been providing emotional scaffolding, the kind of support Alexander should have recognized his son required. The kind Caroline would have provided if she'd lived. Back at the house, Alexander made an announcement that shocked everyone, including himself. "I'm taking a leave of absence from work. 6 months, maybe longer." His assistant, who'd been copying him on urgent emails all morning, nearly dropped her phone. "Sir, the merger can be handled by my executive team. That's why I pay them obscene amounts of money." He looked at Ethan, who was staring at him like he'd announced he was joining the circus. "I've missed too much already. I'm not missing any more." That afternoon, Alexander did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He picked Ethan up from school himself. The other parents did double takes when Alexander Thorne emerged from his Mercedes, a man usually only seen in business magazines suddenly materializing in the pickup line like a regular father. He spotted Ethan and Lucia walking out together, Lucia gesturing animatedly about something while Ethan listened with rapt attention. Then he saw them, the McAllister boy and his friends, hovering near the entrance with ugly expressions. Alexander's protective instincts roared to life. But before he could move, something extraordinary happened. 3 other children, kids Alexander didn't recognize, positioned themselves between Ethan and the bullies. A girl with glasses and a boy with a backpack covered in Star Wars patches and another boy with bright red hair. "Leave him alone, Brandon," the girl said firmly. "We're not scared of you anymore." Brandon McAllister sneered. "Oh yeah? What are you going to do about it, Jamie?" "Tell every teacher, every parent, every person who'll listen what you really are," Jamie replied. "A coward who only feels big when he's making other people feel small." The red-haired boy nodded. "We're done being quiet. You pick on Ethan, you pick on all of us." Alexander watched, stunned, as his son's face transformed. Ethan wasn't cowering or preparing to run. He was standing tall, flanked by friends Alexander hadn't known existed. Lucia caught sight of Alexander and grinned like she'd orchestrated the whole thing, which, Alexander was beginning to suspect, she probably had. Brandon and his crew backed off, muttering threats that rang hollow now. As they slunk away, Jamie turned to Ethan. "You okay?" she asked. Ethan nodded, his stutter barely present. "Why, yeah. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, everyone." In the car, Alexander couldn't contain his curiosity. "Who were those children?" "My friends," Ethan said, and the wonder in his voice cracked something open in Alexander's chest. "Lucia said I should try tea-talking to other kids who eat alone. So I did. And at tea turns out lots of kids feel like outsiders. We just never talked to each other before." "You organized this," Alexander said to Lucia, who was buckled in the back seat beside Ethan. She shrugged. "I just pointed out that there's power in numbers. Bullies rely on isolation. Take that away, and they're just sad kids with their own problems. How did you get so wise at 10 years old?" Lucia's expression flickered, something darker crossing her features before the brightness returned. "My dad left when I was 6. Kids at my old school made fun of me for not having a father. I learned pretty fast that you either let them define you, or you define yourself." Maria's hands tightened in her lap, but she said nothing. Alexander absorbed this new information, feeling another piece of the puzzle click into place. Lucia understood Ethan's pain because she'd lived her own version of it. 2 wounded children finding strength in each other. That evening, Alexander made good on his promise to be present. He sat with Ethan while the boy did homework, actually helping instead of just hovering. He listened to Lucia explain her theory about why Pluto should still be a planet, passionate, scientifically dubious, but entertainingly argued. He asked Maria about her day and learned she'd been taking online courses to finish her college degree. "What are you studying?" he asked. "Education," Maria admitted quietly. "I want to be a teacher." But with Lucia to support and the tuition costs, an idea began forming in Alexander's mind. Later, after the children were in bed, Alexander returned to the conservatory. The space felt different now, alive with possibility instead of haunted by grief. He touched the orchids Caroline had loved, found them thriving under Maria and Lucia's care. His phone buzzed. His head of security. "Sir, you asked me to dig deeper into the McAllister situation. I found something. Gregory McAllister is about to default on a major loan. The lender is one of my subsidiaries, Alexander finished. He'd reviewed the portfolio that afternoon. Yes, sir. You technically own his debt. Alexander smiled, but it faded quickly as another thought occurred to him. He'd spent all day thinking about leverage and consequences, about protecting Ethan by destroying his enemies. But Lucia's approach had been different. She hadn't destroyed the bullies. She'd built something stronger than their cruelty. Community, connection, solidarity. Maybe there was another way. Sir, the security chief prompted. Send me the full file on McAllister. But also, dig into Brandon McAllister's home life. Not for ammunition, for understanding. After he hung up, Alexander stood in the conservatory and made a choice. He could be the ruthless businessman who crushed his son's tormentors. Or he could be something better. He could be the father who taught Ethan that strength wasn't about vengeance. It was about building something bullies couldn't tear down. What would you do in Alexander's position? Destroy the bullies or build something better? Comment your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe. This story is about to take a turn no one sees coming. The file on Brandon McAllister arrived at 6 a.m., and Alexander read it over coffee while the house still slept. What he found made his stomach turn. Gregory McAllister wasn't just financially desperate. He was volatile. 3 noise complaints from neighbors about shouting. A wife who'd filed for separation twice, then withdrawn the paperwork both times. Brandon's younger sister had been pulled from Westridge last year, enrolled in a therapeutic boarding school for behavioral issues. The picture was ugly and familiar. Alexander had seen it before in business rivals who projected success while everything crumbled behind closed doors. Men who took their failures out on the people who couldn't fight back. Brandon wasn't a monster. He was a kid living in a war zone, exporting his trauma to the schoolyard. Alexander set the file down, remembering his own father, a man who'd measured worth in profit margins and viewed affection as weakness. He'd built Alexander into a perfect heir through criticism and impossibly high standards, creating a son who knew how to dominate boardrooms, but not how to comfort a grieving child. The cycle perpetuated itself unless someone chose to break it. Dad, Ethan stood in the doorway, already dressed for school. Are you really taking time off work? I really am. But why? The question held layers of confusion, as if the concept of Alexander choosing Ethan over business didn't compute. Because I've been a terrible father, Alexander said bluntly. And I'd like a chance to be a better one, if you'll let me. Ethan's eyes widened. Before he could respond, Lucia bounded in, Maria trailing behind her apologetically. Sorry, Mr. Thorne, she woke up early and... It's fine. Alexander gestured to the breakfast table. Actually, I'd like to talk to all of you. Over pancakes that Maria insisted on making despite Alexander's protests, he laid out his idea. I've been thinking about Brandon McAllister, he began. About why he does what he does. Because he's a jerk? Lucia suggested through a mouthful of pancake. Because he's hurting, Alexander corrected gently. That doesn't excuse his behavior, but it explains it. And I'm wondering if there's a way to address the problem at its source instead of just punishing the symptoms. He explained what he'd learned about the McAllister family situation, careful not to reveal details that would violate Brandon's privacy. I'm thinking of offering Gregory a debt restructuring. Give him breathing room. Maybe that reduces the pressure at home, which reduces Brandon's need to hurt others. You want to help the guy whose kid beat up Ethan? Lucia's fork clattered against her plate. That's actually really nice. Weirdly nice. But won't people think you're weak? I don't particularly care what people think, Alexander said, surprising himself with the truth of it. I care about doing what's right. But what if it doesn't work? Ethan asked quietly. What if you help his dad and Brandon still hurts people? Then we deal with that too. But Lucia taught me something important. Alexander looked at the girl who'd somehow become central to his family in a matter of weeks. She showed me that building something strong matters more than tearing something down. Lucia flushed, uncomfortable with the praise. I just didn't want Ethan to be alone anymore. And you succeeded, Alexander said. Now I'm trying to succeed at something I've been failing at for 3 years. Being present. Being better. The moment felt fragile and perfect, sunlight streaming through the windows while his small, strange family shared breakfast. Alexander wished he could freeze it, preserve it against whatever came next. His phone shattered the peace. His CFO, voice tight with urgency. Alexander, we have a problem. The Singapore deal is falling apart. They're demanding you fly out personally to salvage negotiations, or they walk. We're talking about a $2 billion contract. $2 billion. 6 months ago, Alexander would have been on a plane within hours. Tell them I'm unavailable, he said. Unavailable? Alexander, this is. Delegate it to Sarah. She's been angling for more responsibility. Time to see what she can do. But I have faith in my team. Let them prove they deserve it. He hung up before the CFO could argue further. Lucia was watching him with newfound respect. You just turned down $2 billion to eat pancakes with us? I turned down $2 billion because I already have everything I need right here, Alexander corrected. It just took me too long to realize it. The meeting with Gregory McAllister was arranged for that afternoon in Alexander's downtown office. Gregory arrived looking haggard, the confident swagger Alexander remembered from industry conferences replaced by barely concealed desperation. Thorne, Gregory said, extending a hand that trembled slightly. I appreciate you seeing me. If this is about the school incident, I've already spoken to Brandon about his behavior. It's not about that. Not directly. Alexander gestured to a chair. I want to discuss your debt situation. Gregory's face went carefully blank. I'm not sure what you mean. Gregory, I own your loan. I know exactly how precarious your position is. Alexander leaned forward. I'm prepared to restructure the terms. Give you 5 years instead of 1. Reduce the interest rate by half. Gregory stared at him like he'd spoken in tongues. Why would you do that? We're competitors. You could crush me right now. I could, Alexander agreed. But I'm learning that crushing people doesn't actually solve problems. It just creates more of them. This is about Brandon and your son, Gregory realized, his face flushing with shame. You're trying to buy me off, so I'll control my kid. I'm trying to reduce the pressure that might be contributing to your son's behavior, Alexander corrected carefully. Financial stress affects families. I'm offering you relief. What you do with that opportunity is your choice. Gregory stood abruptly, pride and desperation warring in his expression. I don't need your charity, Thorne. It's not charity. It's business. A stressed competitor makes poor decisions that destabilize the market. I prefer competent rivals. Alexander kept his voice neutral. Take the deal or don't. But don't reject it because of ego. Gregory paced to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. My son is becoming me. Angry, lashing out, hurting people because he hurts. I see it happening, and I don't know how to stop it. Maybe start by getting help for yourself, Alexander said quietly. For your family. The debt restructuring buys you time. What you do with that time determines everything else. Gregory turned, and Alexander saw something broken in the man's eyes. Why are you really doing this? Because a very wise 10-year-old taught me that cycles only end when someone chooses to end them, Alexander replied. I'm choosing. The question is whether you will too. Gregory McAllister left Alexander's office without accepting the deal, and for 3 days, there was only silence. Alexander threw himself into his new role as present father with the same intensity he'd once reserved for hostile takeovers. He drove Ethan to school every morning. He volunteered to chaperone the upcoming field trip to the planetarium. He sat through a parent-teacher conference where he learned his son was brilliant at science, struggling with social studies, and had recently started participating in class discussions despite his stutter. He's found his confidence, Mrs. Henderson told Alexander. Whatever you're doing at home, it's working. What he was doing at home was letting a 10-year-old girl do the job he should have been doing all along. But he was learning. Watching how Lucia encouraged Ethan without coddling him, challenged him without crushing him, celebrated small victories like they were Olympic medals. On the third evening, Maria knocked on his study door. Mr. Thorne? I wanted to give my notice. Alexander's heart plummeted. What? What? Maria twisted her hands, not meeting his eyes. It's not appropriate. Lucia's spending so much time with Ethan, eating at your table, you helping with her homework last night. People will talk. They already are. Let them talk. You don't understand. Maria's voice was tight. At my last job, the family was wonderful too. Their daughter and Lucia became close. Then other parents started commenting, suggesting it wasn't proper for the staff's child to be so familiar. The family let me go to avoid the gossip. Alexander stood, anger burning through him. I am not them. I know you mean well, Mr. Thorne. But you're a single man with a young son. I'm your employee. This situation is exactly what both our children need, Alexander interrupted firmly. Maria, I don't care what narrow-minded people think about who eats at my table. Lucia has been more family to Ethan than half our actual relatives. If you want to leave because you're unhappy here, I understand. But if you're leaving because you're worried about appearances, then I'm asking you to reconsider. Maria's eyes glistened. You really mean that? I really do. Alexander softened his tone. Besides, I have a proposition for you. I want to fund your education degree. Full tuition, and I'll adjust your schedule so you can attend classes. In exchange, you continue managing the household part-time and let Lucia keep being the friend my son desperately needs. Mr. Thorne, I can't accept. Why not? I throw money at strangers all the time through my foundation. Why shouldn't I invest in someone who's actually impacted my life? He smiled. Besides, good teachers are invaluable. I'm making a strategic investment in education. Maria wiped her eyes, laughing shakily. You're impossible. So I've been told. On Friday afternoon, Alexander got a call from Principal Morrison. Mr. Thorne, I thought you should know. Brandon McAllister came to my office today and asked to speak with Ethan. With supervision, of course. Alexander's protective instincts flared. Absolutely not. That boy has terrorized my son for months. Mr. Thorne. Morrison's voice was gentle. Brandon wants to apologize. His father brought him in this morning, and they've enrolled him in counseling. I think this could be an important step for both boys. Alexander closed his eyes, remembering his conversation with Gregory. Apparently, the man had made a choice after all. I'll talk to Ethan, Alexander said finally. It's his decision. That evening in the conservatory, which had become their family gathering space, Alexander explained the situation to Ethan and Lucia. Lucia's immediate response was predictable. It's a trap. He wants to lure Ethan somewhere private and finish what he started. Lucia, Maria chided. What? I've seen enough movies. This is classic villain behavior. But Ethan was quiet, staring at the whiteboard where he'd been working through a physics problem. Finally, he spoke. I want to hear what he has to say. Ethan, you don't have to, Alexander said. You don't owe him anything. I know. But Ethan struggled for words. If someone had talked to me after Mom died, really talked to me, maybe I wouldn't have been so sad for so long. Maybe Brandon needs that. Alexander felt his throat tighten. When had his 8-year-old son become wiser than him? You're a better person than I am, he said quietly. I learned from Lucia, Ethan replied. She always says hurting people need help, not more hurt. Lucia looked uncomfortable. Yeah, well, I also said Brandon McAllister was a future felon, so my track record on judging people isn't perfect. The meeting was arranged for Monday, in Principal Morrison's office with both Alexander and Gregory present. Brandon arrived looking smaller than Alexander remembered, his earlier swagger completely absent. I'm sorry, Brandon said, the words tumbling out like he'd been rehearsing them. I'm sorry for being mean, for pushing you, for making fun of how you talk. It was wrong, really wrong. Ethan nodded slowly. Why did you do it? Brandon glanced at his father, who nodded encouragingly. Because I was mad about stuff at home, and you were an easy target. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. My dad and I are working on things. I'm seeing a counselor. I want to be better. The silence stretched long enough to be uncomfortable. Then Ethan did something that shocked everyone. He extended his hand. Okay. Brandon stared at the offered hand like it might be a trick. Okay, I forgive you. But if you're mean to anyone else, Lucia will probably destroy you. Just so you know. A startled laugh escaped Brandon. Is she really that scary? Absolutely terrifying, Ethan confirmed solemnly. They shook hands, and Alexander saw the weight lift from both boys' shoulders. Not everything. They wouldn't be friends, probably not for a long time if ever. But the cycle had been broken. After the McAllisters left, Gregory paused at the door. I took the deal. The debt restructuring. And I'm getting help. Family therapy, anger management, the works. Good, Alexander said simply. Why did you really do it? The honest reason. Alexander looked at his son, who was talking quietly with Principal Morrison about the upcoming planetarium trip. Because I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Someone my wife would have been ashamed of. A little girl with scraped knuckles reminded me that being powerful means protecting people, not dominating them. Gregory nodded slowly. Your maid's daughter? My son's best friend, Alexander corrected. There's a difference. Things are finally turning around. But will it last? What challenges do you think still lie ahead? Comment below and subscribe to see how this incredible story concludes. 3 weeks later, Alexander stood in the Westridge Academy auditorium watching his son prepare to do the impossible. The school's annual talent showcase was a tradition, students performing music, dance, comedy sketches, anything to demonstrate their abilities. Ethan had never participated before. Too risky, too many opportunities for public humiliation. Until Lucia had an idea. "You should read," she'd announced over dinner one night. "You're amazing at reading out loud now. Show everyone what you can do." "I see can't," Ethan had whispered, panic flooding his features. "What if I mess up in front of everyone?" "Then you mess up," Lucia said with a shrug. "So what? At least you tried something brave." Now, backstage, Ethan was clutching a worn copy of The Little Prince, his hands trembling. Alexander knelt beside him. "You don't have to do this, son. There's no shame in changing your mind." "Yes, there is," Ethan said quietly. "There's shame in being too scared to try." Alexander's heart swelled with pride so fierce it was almost painful. This child, his child, had somehow found courage in the ruins of their shared grief. Lucia appeared, wearing the dress Maria had made for the occasion. She was performing a piano piece earlier in the show, something challenging that she'd been practicing obsessively for weeks. "You ready?" she asked Ethan. "No." "You." "Nope. Let's do it anyway." They bumped fists, a ritual Alexander had seen them perform dozens of times now. Two warriors preparing for battle. The auditorium was packed. Parents, teachers, students. Alexander spotted Gregory McAllister in the crowd with his wife, their marriage apparently surviving whatever storms they were weathering. Brandon sat between them, looking uncomfortable in a suit. The show began. A sixth grader juggled. Twin girls performed a dance routine. A boy played violin with technical precision and zero passion. Then Lucia took the stage. Alexander had heard her practicing, but hearing her in the conservatory was different from watching her command an audience. She played Chopin with a maturity that belied her 10 years, her small hands coaxing emotion from the keys that had half the parents wiping their eyes. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. She took a small bow, caught Ethan's eye backstage, and grinned. "Your turn," her expression said. 3 more acts. A comedy sketch that fell flat. A girl singing a pop song slightly off-key. A magic trick that went wrong and somehow became more entertaining for it. Then Principal Morrison took the microphone. "Our next performer is Ethan Thorne, reading from The Little Prince." The murmur that went through the crowd was unmistakable. Everyone knew about Ethan's stutter. This was either going to be inspirational or catastrophic, and people were bracing for either outcome. Ethan walked onto the stage, and Alexander's heart hammered so hard he thought his ribs might crack. His son looked so small under the stage lights, clutching that book like a life preserver. The silence was deafening. Ethan opened the book. His hands shook. He took a breath, and he began to read. "Once when I was 6 years old, I saw a magnificent picture." The stutter hit on magnificent, and Alexander heard someone in the crowd shift uncomfortably. But Ethan pushed through, his voice gaining strength with each word. "In a book about the primeval forest called True Stories." It was a picture of a boa constrictor in the act of swallowing an animal. He was doing it. Actually doing it. The stutter emerged occasionally, snagging on certain sounds, but Ethan didn't let it stop him. He read about the little prince and his rose, about the fox and what it means to be tamed, about seeing with the heart instead of just the eyes. Alexander watched his son transform under those lights, watched him become someone who refused to let fear win. And he realized this moment wasn't just about Ethan's courage. It was about everything that had led here. Maria bringing Lucia into their home. Lucia refusing to let Ethan face his bullies alone. Alexander finally choosing presence over profit. All of it converged in this moment. In this brave boy reading words that stuttered out imperfectly, but perfectly true. When Ethan reached the final lines, his voice was clear and strong. "In one of the stars I shall be living. In one of them I shall be laughing. And so it will be as if all the stars were laughing when you look at the sky at night." He closed the book. The silence held for one impossible heartbeat. Then the auditorium erupted. People were standing, applauding, cheering. Alexander was on his feet, tears streaming down his face without shame. On stage, Ethan looked stunned, like he couldn't quite believe what he'd accomplished. Lucia was jumping up and down backstage, pumping her fist in victory. But what happened next made Alexander's tears fall harder. Brandon McAllister stood up in the crowd and started clapping louder, more enthusiastically than anyone else. Other students who'd watched Ethan be bullied for months joined in, until the entire student section was giving Ethan a standing ovation. His son had done more than read a story. He'd shown every kid in that room that being different wasn't something to hide. It was something to own. After the show, Alexander found Ethan surrounded by classmates. Jamie was there, and the red-haired boy, and a dozen other kids Alexander didn't recognize. That was amazing, Jamie gushed. How did you memorize all that? I didn't memorize it, Ethan explained. I just practiced reading it until I wasn't scared anymore. Brandon approached awkwardly, his parents hanging back. Hey, Ethan. That was really cool. You were really brave. Ethan studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Thanks, Brandon. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was something more complex. Acknowledgement that people could change, that yesterday's bully might be trying to be tomorrow's better person. Later, as they drove home, Lucia fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from her own performance and from cheering Ethan through his. Ethan was still wired, chattering about who said what and how it felt to have people actually listening to him. Dad, he said suddenly, I think Mom would have liked tonight. Alexander's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She would have loved it. She would have been so proud of you. Are you? Proud, I mean. Alexander pulled the car over, right there on the side of the road, and turned to face his son. Ethan, I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life. Not of myself, not of any business achievement, nothing. You are the most courageous person I know. Ethan's smile could have lit the entire city. In the back seat, Lucia stirred. Are we having a moment? Because I'm really tired and moments are great, but I'd also like to go home. They laughed, and Alexander pulled back onto the road, carrying his strange, perfect family toward home. 6 months after that night at the talent showcase, Alexander Thorne sat in the conservatory watching snow fall outside the windows. The orchids Caroline had planted were blooming again, filling the air with subtle fragrance that reminded him of her without breaking his heart. Progress, he thought. For all of them. Ethan and Lucia were sprawled on the floor, working on a science project about gravitational waves. Their easy banter filled the space with life, Lucia explaining concepts with wild hand gestures, Ethan correcting her more outlandish theories with scientific precision and barely a stutter. The stutter hadn't disappeared entirely. Alexander had learned it never would, and that was okay. Ethan had learned to live with it, work through it, even joke about it. Just last week, when a word got stuck, he'd grinned and said, My brain moves faster than my mouth. It's a processing speed issue. Lucia had high-fived him for that one. Maria entered carrying a tray of hot chocolate, still insisting on taking care of them even though her role had evolved far beyond housekeeper. She was finishing her teaching degree, already had job offers from 3 schools. Alexander had a feeling Westridge Academy was about to make her an offer she couldn't refuse. He'd been having conversations with Principal Morrison about the value of teachers who understood both education and empathy. The college acceptance letter came, Maria said quietly, setting down the tray. For the graduate program. And? Alexander prompted. Maria's smile was radiant. I got in. Full scholarship. Lucia jumped up, nearly knocking over the science project. Mom, that's amazing. It's because of you, Mr. Thorne. The recommendation letter, the foundation grant. It's because of you, Alexander corrected. Your work, your dedication, your talent. I just made sure the right people saw it. He'd been doing a lot of that lately, using his resources not to dominate, but to elevate. The Thorne Foundation had shifted focus under his guidance, investing in anti-bullying programs, speech therapy services for underprivileged kids, scholarships for children of service workers. His board thought he'd lost his mind. His profit margins said otherwise. Turned out doing good and doing well weren't mutually exclusive. Who knew? The doorbell rang, and moments later, Alexander's assistant, who'd adjusted to his new work-life balance with remarkable grace, showed in an unexpected visitor. Gregory McAllister, holding a bottle of wine and looking nervous. I hope this isn't a bad time, Gregory said. I wanted to thank you. Properly. Alexander gestured him into the study, leaving the kids to their project. In the 6 months since their deal, Gregory's company had stabilized. More importantly, Gregory himself had stabilized. Family therapy had apparently worked wonders. "Brandon's doing better," Gregory said once they were alone. "Really better. He joined the school's peer mediation program. Can you imagine? My kid, helping other kids resolve conflicts peacefully. People can change when given the chance," Alexander said simply. "He wants to apologize to Ethan again. More formally. And to Lucia." Gregory laughed shakily. "He's terrified of her, by the way. Calls her the tiny, scary one. She is rather formidable. Alexander, I need to know. Why did you really help me? We were rivals. You could have destroyed me." Alexander considered the question, watching snow accumulate on the windowsill. "I had a choice," he said finally. "I could be the man my father raised, ruthless, dominant, measuring worth in victories over others. Or I could be the man my wife believed I could become, someone who used power to build rather than destroy. A 10-year-old girl reminded me which version I wanted to be." Gregory nodded slowly. "Brandon talks about Ethan like he's some kind of hero now. Says any kid brave enough to read on stage with a stutter is braver than most adults. He's not wrong." After Gregory left, Alexander returned to the conservatory. The science project had been abandoned in favor of a fort-building operation involving every cushion in the house. Ethan and Lucia had constructed an elaborate structure and were now defending it from Maria's playful attacks. This, Alexander thought, this was what he'd been missing. Not perfection. The cushion fort was structurally unsound and would collapse any minute, but presence, joy, family in all its chaotic, beautiful imperfection. His phone buzzed. A news alert. His company had just closed the Singapore deal his CFO had handled in his absence, for $3 billion instead of $2 billion. Apparently, absence hadn't made the heart grow fonder, but it had made his executive team grow more capable. He silenced the phone without reading further. "Dad," Ethan called. "You have to see this." Lucia engineered a retractable roof mechanism using coat hangers. "It's architecturally brilliant," Lucia declared with zero humility. "Also, it's about to fall on our heads, so maybe stand back." Alexander laughed and joined them anyway, helping to reinforce the structure with the kind of problem-solving he usually reserved for corporate crises. The fort collapsed twice before they got it stable, and somewhere in the chaos, Maria snapped a photo on her phone. Later, she showed it to him. The image captured all four of them laughing, covered in cushions, Ethan's face bright with happiness, Lucia's arms raised in triumph. "Frame it," Alexander said. "Put it on my desk." That evening, after Maria and Lucia had gone to their apartment, Alexander tucked Ethan into bed, a ritual he'd missed for 3 years and would never miss again. "Dad," Ethan said sleepily, "are you happy now?" The question caught Alexander off guard. "What do you mean? You were sad for a long time. After Mom. But you seem different now. Better." Alexander smoothed his son's hair, emotion tightening his throat. "I am better. Because of you. Because Lucia refused to let either of us stay broken." "She's pretty amazing," Ethan agreed, yawning. "I'm glad her mom works for us." "I'm glad she's family," Alexander corrected gently. "There's a difference." As Ethan drifted off to sleep, Alexander stood in the doorway, watching his son's peaceful face. He thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, isolated, absent, convinced that providing money was the same as providing love. He thought about a security camera capturing a small girl stepping between his son and his tormentors, refusing to move even when threatened. That moment had shattered his carefully constructed world, and from the ruins, something better had emerged. He wouldn't say he was grateful for Ethan's bullying. He'd never be grateful for his son's pain. But he was grateful for the wake-up call. Grateful for Lucia's fierce loyalty. Grateful for Maria's quiet strength. Grateful for the chance to become the father Ethan deserved. In the conservatory, the orchids Caroline planted bloomed in the darkness, filling rooms she'd never see again with beauty she'd always believed in. She'd known, Alexander realized, known that he had the capacity for this kind of love, this kind of presence. She'd seen it even when he couldn't see it himself. "I'm trying," he whispered to her memory. "I'm finally trying." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in fresh possibilities. Inside, Alexander Thorne stood guard over his sleeping son, present and purposeful and finally, impossibly, at peace. And that's the story of how a billionaire learned the most valuable lesson of all, that the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the moments we choose to show up for the people we love. Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs this reminder today. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories that celebrate courage, compassion, and second chances. Drop a comment below telling me what part of this story resonated with you most. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, the bravest thing we can do is choose connection over isolation, compassion over vengeance, and presence over perfection. See you in the next story.